Rồi.
Được chưa? Này được chưa? Lẩm bẩm nữa.
Rồi, được rồi.
You hear marble stairways ringing under sandaled footsteps as sunrise spreads slowly across the Aventine Hill. The year is 73 AD. In the villa's atrium, a 14-year-old boy adjusts his fine silk tunic. His fingers tremble faintly as he spreads charcoal around his eyes, getting ready for a day of duty. 3 years earlier, his family traded him for 8,000 denarii to settle their debts. Today he served Senator Marcus Gjagi, who demands perfection from his most valued human possession. Romans named them Konkubinos, a word that modern translations struggle to convey. Unlike the tender companion, our language implies these were possessions. The Digest of Justinian described them plainly. Slaves obtained deliberately for intimate companionship separate from farm laborers or domestic music savants. Roman law acknowledged no age of consent for slaves. A master's power over his property remained absolute, reaching into every corner of their existence. The jurist Gas wrote that masters held the power of life and death over all their slaves, including concubines. These boys usually arrived from 3 regions. Syrian children fetched the highest prices, often nearing 10,000 denarii in Rome's slave markets. Greek boys came close behind, valued for their supposed refinement. Gaelic music captives seized during Caesar's campaigns formed a newer market that expanded throughout the 1st century. Age decided value. Boys purchased between 7 and 14 years old music commanded premium prices. Dealers knew buyers wanted certain precise qualities. Clear skin, graceful movement, and voices not yet fully changed. A concubine's working life seldom lasted music beyond his 20th year. Surviving records from Pompeii reveal the economic scale, while a common field slave cost 500 denarii. Appealing boys sold for 15 to 20 times that price. The wealthy senator Lucius Padinius Secundus kept 400 slaves, including 12 concubines, representing almost half his human property's overall value. The social order placed concubines in a strange position. They stood above ordinary slaves in privilege, yet remained utterly vulnerable. They wore silk while kitchen slaves wore coarse wool. Yet any free citizen might demand their services without music penalty. Marcus Tullius Cicero's letters describe borrowing a friend's concubine for a dinner gathering, treating the arrangement as casually as asking for wine. This acceptance spread across Roman society from humble homes to imperial palaces. Slave traders maintained permanent markets in Rome's Campus Martius and seasonal auctions across provincial cities. The process resembled cattle trading more than human commerce. Prospective buyers inspected boys with cold detachment, checking music teeth for health, testing skin elasticity, judging muscle tone. Dealers readied their merchandise with careful precision. They used pumice stones to strip body hair, applied pale lead cosmetics to brighten skin, and taught certain walking styles that hinted availability while preserving innocence. Boys learned to stand with eyes lowered, yet bodies arranged for inspection. Syrian dealer Marcus Casilius Jucundus, whose business records survived Vuvius, specialized in what he termed delicate merchandise. His tablets list precise buyer preferences. Senator Flavius favored boys with curled hair and gentle voices, while wealthy merchant Gas saw taller boys with athletic builds. Physical examinations reached far beyond appearance. Buyers measured flexibility through required movements, tested boys' voices through recitation drills, and judged basic intelligence using simple questions. Medical inspections confirmed overall health, music, and verified the boys satisfied Roman expectations for intimate companionship. Fraud occurred frequently. Dealers darkened hair using music walnut dye, applied cosmetics to conceal scars, and used herbal mixtures that briefly slowed physical maturation. Some boys had records altered so they appeared younger, raising their market value. Seasonal cycles also shaped prices. Spring auctions timed alongside military campaigns brought new captives and reduced prices. Winter markets in Rome demanded premium rates as wealthy households prepared for the social season. Economic strain during the year of 4 emperors forced concubine prices to fall by half while patrician families liquidated property. The mentality behind purchase exposed unsettling priorities. Buyers wanted boys appearing both polished and defenseless. Educated enough to offer intellectual companionship, yet young enough to remain obedient. The contradiction was deliberate. Romance desired cultured victims. Yet the selection process carried its own grim efficiency. Boys who failed to attract purchasers faced harsher outcomes. Music, the unwanted, were sold to brothel, dispatched to gladiator schools, or sentenced to mine labor where life expectancy was measured in months instead of years. This marketplace fueled its own momentum, creating demand that slave raiders eagerly satisfied through warfare and kidnappings across the Mediterranean world. Purchase marked the start of systematic conditioning meant to break personal will while cultivating profitable abilities. New concubines entered households where every element of behavior, music, required relearning according to Roman standards. Physical, music instruction came first. Boys practiced particular dancing forms, the chord acts for private gatherings, and more refined motions for public entertainment. Music training included the lyre, flute, and stara. Masters demanded competence within months rather than years. Fellure resulted in punishment, leaving lasting marks concealed beneath silk tunics. Intellectual instruction followed careful patterns. Concubines memorized long passages of poetry, especially works by Ovid and Aeschylus celebrating similar relationships. They studied simple mathematics for household duties and conversational Latin polished enough to entertain educated visitors. Behavioral discipline proved most important. Boys learned when speaking was allowed, how to laugh properly at their master's jokes, and correct responses to commands. Training involved reading subtle signals. A lifted finger meaning wine was required. A certain glance indicating they should withdraw for the night. The writer Lucius Junius Camella recorded training practices in his agricultural manual. Though mainly about farm administration, his section on domestic slaves reveals a structured method. Daily routines started before dawn with grooming. Lessons continued through afternoon instruction and ended with evening performance rehearsal. Language education extended beyond simple communication. Syrian and Gallic boys studied not only Latin vocabulary but music, refined pronunciation associated with education. Greek remained essential in cultured homes. The poet Martial ridiculed masters whose concubines could not discuss philosophy while pouring wine. Physical conditioning focused on preserving youthful appearance. Carefully controlled meals prevented weight gain that might signal approaching maturity. Exercise routines emphasized flexibility rather than building strength. Some masters hired Syrian physicians who claimed herbal remedies could postpone bodily changes that lowered market value. The breaking process worked on the mind as much as the body. Newly acquired concubines were separated from other slaves at first, creating reliance on their master's approval. Resistance brought immediate consequences meant to warn the others. Training length differed depending on age and origin. Younger boys needed longer conditioning yet achieved more complete transformation. Older purchasers learned more quickly but kept memories of freedom that made them less dependable. Success was judged through performance at social gatherings. A properly trained concubine moved effortlessly between duties, dancing, singing, pouring wine, and providing intimate companionship whenever circumstances demanded. Yet this education carried severe costs. Boys who performed well received privileges, separating them from other slaves, creating isolation within captivity. Their polished talents marked them as valuable possessions while simultaneously guaranteeing their continued exploitation. Morning light brought the same routine in wealthy Roman households across the empire. While other slaves began kitchen labor or garden work, concubines endured elaborate grooming rituals filling the first hours of the day. Every detail demanded perfection. Music, hair arranged in styles judged effeminate for free men, yet acceptable for their position. Banquet service exposed the full scale of their objectification. During dinner music parties, concubines remained motionless behind dining couches for hours, wearing little clothing regardless of season. They held perfume bottles, towels, and finger bowls, ready for any guest's request. The satirist Petronius described such scenes with casual cruelty, noting diners discussed the boys' qualities as though they were decorative objects. Bathhouse attendants formed another routine duty. Concubines accompanied their masters to public baths carrying oil flasks and stridils while waiting in the calarium. Their presence signaled wealth. Maintaining an attractive, carefully groomed with companion demanded continuing expense few could afford. Entertainment obligations reached beyond simple service. At social gatherings, they performed arranged dances, recited poetry, and took part in clever conversation with guests. The elder Pliny wrote approvingly about a banquet where the host's concubine discussed Stoic philosophy while displaying flute techniques, though he described this as remarkable rather than common. Rivalry among several concubines within the same household created further pressure. Masters frequently kept multiple boys of varying ages, setting them against one another for favor. Older concubines guided newcomers while quietly seeing them as future replacements. This arrangement prevented unity, music, while enforcing obedience through manufactured jealousy. Seasonal responsibilities changed but never ended. During Rome's social season, concubines attended theater performances. Seated at their master's feet instead of benches visible to everyone as possessions. Festival seasons increased demands as hosts competed with elaborate entertainments prominently displaying music their most attractive slaves. Aging introduced growing anxiety. Physical developments that appeared despite preventative efforts meant declining value and uncertain futures. Voice deepening, muscle growth, and facial hair could bring instant demotion within the household or sale to less prestigious owners. Night obligations remained unspoken yet understood. After guests departed and household servants withdrew to their quarters, concubines stayed available at their master's discretion. Roman law clearly stated slaves possess no right to refuse any request made by their owners. Household structure placed concubines in a complicated position. They received better food, clothing, and living quarters than ordinary slaves. Yet their favored status made them objects of resentment. Kitchen laborers and field workers often viewed concubines as collaborators with their repressors instead of fellow sufferers. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect was how this routine became ordinary for everyone involved. Masters considered it natural privilege. Guests treated it as expected entertainment, and the boys themselves learned to display eager obedience while burying their humanity behind practiced smiles. The machinery of constant exploitation functioned with bureaucratic efficiency that turned personal horror into routine inevitability. The pursuit of endless youth demanded daily torment disguised as grooming, music, rituals. Each morning, concubines endured procedures meant to preserve the illusion, music, that time remained frozen. Pumice stones scraped away emerging body hair, leaving skin, music, raw and bleeding. The process repeated each day, creating permanent scars that Romans preferred to natural maturity. Cosmetic treatments transformed faces into painted masks. White lead powder imported at enormous cost from Spanish mines produced the pale complexion Romans linked with refinement. Antimony. Snots lined the eyes in styles highlighting youth and vulnerability. Vermilion-colored lips in shades suggesting constant availability. These substances caused slow poisoning, headaches, stomach pain, and progressive organ damage that shortened already fragile lives. Dietary manipulation served two purposes: maintaining slender figures, music, while proving complete mastery over their bodies. Some masters enforced starvation routines that kept boys thin and weak. Others force-fed selected foods believed to slow physical development. The physician Serenus of Epsus recorded treatments involving limited protein intake and herbal mixtures supposedly preventing muscle growth. Hair styling consumed long hours every morning. Intricate arrangements using heated irons and scented oils produced appearances marking their status. Curls were shaped into patterns free Romans would view as shameful yet fitting for property. Syrian slaves skilled in barbering earned premium wages maintaining these elaborate designs. Medical interventions revealed how far masters would go to preserve youthful looks. Bloodletting supposedly kept skin soft by restraining masculine strength. Certain herbs allegedly delayed music, voice changes, though their real effects often included dangerous consequences such as liver damage and lasting weakness. The most severe alterations aimed to prevent unavoidable physical maturity. Although Roman law technically banned castration inside imperial territory after Domitian's decree in 83 AD, buyers simply purchased already altered boys from outside the borders. Dealers in Syria and Asia Minor carried out these procedures, then delivered the victims to Roman markets where they earned extraordinary prices. Perfuming rituals signaled ownership as much as luxury. Costly fragrances from Arabia and India. Cinnamon, frankincense, music, and rare spices worth more than many slaves' entire value were applied generously. These scents proclaimed their masters' wealth while marking the boys as luxury possessions rather than human lives. Damage control became constant necessity. Physicians such as Galen treated wounds caused by daily use, applying wine and olive oil to injuries while prescribing pain remedies that created dependencies masters could exploit. Music, medical writings describe treatments meant to repair bodily injuries, revealing both the frequent damage and the financial desire to preserve valuable property. The overall result of these practices produced bodies that seemed locked in adolescence while suffering steady decline beneath carefully manufactured perfection. At 10 years old, Marcus Salvas Felix stood upon the auction platform in the Bundesium slave market. His Syrian features immediately attracting attention from Roman buyers. The boy's father, Music, a silk merchant ruined by pirates who destroyed his cargo vessels, had sold his youngest son to satisfy creditors. Felix sold for 8,000 denarii, enough to purchase a small vineyard. His purchaser, Senator Gaius Flavius Clemens, owned a villa overlooking the Bay of Naples, where Felix would spend the next 8 years. The household already kept 3 additional concubines, creating instant rivalry for their master's favor. Felix learned quickly survival depended on predicting desires before they were spoken. Instruction began with language correction. Felix's Greek accent identified him as foreign, requiring daily pronunciation drills that erased signs of his birthplace. He memorized poetry by Oid and Catullus, learning to recite lines praising relationships resembling his own captivity. Music lessons followed, lyre, flute, and vocal practice, developing abilities for entertaining guests during elaborate banquets. The villa's social schedule revolved around political gatherings where concubines served as living ornaments. Felix learned to remain motionless for hours, holding perfume bottles while senators debated imperial policy and provincial appointments. During one notable banquet in 79 AD, Clemens wagered Felix as a stake in a dice game, losing Music him briefly to another senator before winning him back with amphora of rare Falernian wine. Physical changes beginning in Felix's 16th year produced growing anxiety. His voice deepened despite herbal treatments, music, and facial hair demanded increasingly frequent removal. Clemens, who had paid premium prices for youthful features, showed fading interest as Felix matured beyond the music Roman ideal. The end arrived quickly in 81 AD. Felix, now 18 and clearly showing manhood, was sold to a brothel keeper in Subura for 1,200 denarii, only a fraction of his original cost. His 8 years of service had produced considerable returns for Clemens through social connections and political advantage. Yet those benefits vanished once Felix could no longer sustain the illusion of unending youth. Roman law built a structure that made organized exploitation not merely legal but formally protected. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code, established absolute ownership rights over slaves, including unrestricted access to their bodies. Masters faced no legal punishment for any treatment of their human property regardless of age or circumstance. The jurist Ulpian wrote extensively on slave ownership, explaining that masters held complete authority, dominica potestas, over every aspect of a slave's existence. Court records from the 2nd century AD showed judges consistently ruling in favor of masters' rights, even in disputes involving clear cruelty. Legal precedent established that slaves could not testify against their owners, ensuring abuse remained hidden within household walls. Social attitudes strengthened these legal permissions through cultural celebration. Poets such as Catullus and Tibullus composed tender verses to their concubines, creating literary traditions that romanticized ownership. These works portrayed affection as sincere while never challenging the basic imbalance of power. Music, Martial's epics casually mentioned borrowing friends' concubines, treating such arrangements as ordinary social courtesy. Public music visibility formed part of their role within Roman society. Theatersitting. Laws required concubines to sit at their master's feet rather than on benches, visibly demonstrating their status before entire audiences. Festival participation involved them in community celebrations where their presence advertised their owner's wealth and refinement. Political meaning reached beyond personal pleasure. Senators presented concubines to colleagues as diplomatic gifts, strengthening alliances through shared complicity. Provincial governors received attractive boys as tributes from local rulers, hoping for favorable decisions. These exchanges built networks, music of obligation that reinforced Roman political systems. Philosophical justification offered intellectual cover for organized cruelty. Stoic thinkers such as Seneca argued slavery represented natural hierarchy with some people destined for servitude. Music, Epicurean philosophy emphasized the pursuit of pleasure, conveniently excusing exploitation of those unable to resist. Even critics of slavery seldom questioned the keeping of concubines, accepting it as an unavoidable social practice. Marriage laws created sharp contrasts that revealed concubines' vulnerability. Free Roman women possessed legal protections against forced intimacy with adultery laws defending their personal autonomy. Slave law offered no similar safeguards, explicitly granting masters unlimited access to their property regardless of consent or circumstance. Regional differences existed, yet preserved, music, consistent patterns of exploitation throughout the empire. The economics of concubinage, music revealed Rome's ability to treat human beings as investment assets. Detailed financial records from Pompey's business archives show that maintaining a high-status concubine required yearly expenses exceeding the wealth of most citizens. Purchase prices represented only the beginning. Daily upkeep, clothing, cosmetics, medical attention, and education created continuing costs few could maintain. Status symbol value drove much of the market demand. Welche Romans competed through conspicuous luxury with beautiful educated concubines acting music as living displays of their owner's refinement and resources. A number of concubines within a household directly reflected social rank, creating music artificial demand that dealers eagerly exploited. Gift economies developed through lending and exchange arrangements among elite families. Marcus Cassus' letters mentioned borrowing Lucius Lucullus' Syrian boy for a banquet with reciprocal favors expected. These exchanges created social obligations that reinforced political alliances while treating human lives as luxury possessions shared among friends. Investment strategies revealed cold financial reasoning. Some masters specialized in purchasing young boys, training them carefully, then reselling them later for significant profit. Others concentrated on breeding programs, forcing encounters between attractive slaves to produce children who could later be prepared for concubinage. These practices produced multi-generational cycles of exploitation driven by market incentives. Inheritance created music complicated problems when masters died. Legal records from Alexandria show concubines divided among heirs like other valuable property. 3 brothers sharing possession of a Syrian boy on rotating monthly schedules illustrates the total commodification of human life. Disputes over damaged property resulted in lawsuits revealing casual attitudes toward causing lasting injury. Debt slavery created additional sources of supply. Freeborn Roman children whose families faced bankruptcy could be sold into concubinage, their previous status offering no protection once legal ownership transferred. Pirates seized travelers and sold them regardless of original social rank, demonstrating how economic pressures could pull anyone into slavery. Market manipulation involved artificial scarcity and dealer cartels that controlled prices. Evidence from Egyptian papyri shows coordinated efforts to restrict supply during periods of high demand, increasing profits while securing reliable income. Streams. Seasonal cycles exploited military campaigns that produced fresh captives during spring months. Economic downturns triggered mass liquidations, flooding markets with concubines whose masters could no longer afford their upkeep. During the crisis of the 3rd century, surviving records show boys traded for grain used to repay debts or gambled away in dice games where their lives served as stakes in casual entertainment. Manumission, when it occurred, seldom meant genuine freedom from continued obligations to former masters. Resistance appeared in forms history rarely recorded, music operating in the shadows beyond constant supervision. Fignet illnesses offered brief escape from duties, music, though masters soon learned to distinguish true sickness from desperate attempts, music at relief. Some boys deliberately gained weight or inflicted scars that lowered their market value, accepting punishment as preferable to continued exploitation. Records from Roman physicians indicate suicide rates among concubines greatly exceeded those of other slave groups. Seneca noted that cautious masters limited access to ropes, sharp tools, and certain plants known for deadly effects. The existence of these precautions suggests self-harm occurred frequently enough to require systematic prevention. Psychological survival methods developed from necessity. Many survivors practiced music dissociation, allowing the mind to escape while the body remained available for use. Private imagined worlds became refuges where they preserved fragments of identity apart from their assigned roles. Some constructed detailed internal stories that helped them endure daily humiliations. Support networks functioned through whispered exchanges and quiet signals masters rarely noticed. Boys from similar regions shared languages and cultural memories that created emotional bonds. Hidden communication methods warned newcomers about dangerous masters or particular threats, building music informal survival knowledge passed between generations of victims. Manipulation techniques developed as complex survival strategies. Experienced concubines learned to set masters against one another, exploiting rivalries in competition for minor advantages. Some cultivated emotional dependence in their owners, creating psychological, music leverage that offered limited protection from the worst abuses. Escape attempts, though seldom successful, music happened often enough that Roman law defined specific punishments for runaway concubines. Branding, hobbling, and execution served as deterrents while revealing how far masters would go to protect their investments. The few successful escapes usually involved help from sympathetic freedmen or other slaves willing to risk severe punishment. Mental health damage appeared through symptoms Roman medicine blamed on imbalanced temperament rather than recognizing trauma. Chronic anxiety described music as nervous exhaustion was widespread among this group. Depression called melancholic disposition affected most concubines regardless of treatment or circumstance. Long-lasting effects continued even for those who eventually achieved freedom. Freed concubines faced social stigma, emotional scars, and physical illness that followed them through their shortened lives. Social attitudes began shifting during the late Empire as evolving Roman ideas questioned established practices. Philosophical schools increasingly emphasized human dignity, though these theoretical changes seldom produced real protections for existing slaves. Economic realities played greater roles. Maintaining urban slave households became extremely costly as the empire experienced mounting financial strain. Legal reforms appeared slowly through imperial decrees that introduced limited protections while preserving the fundamental system. Constantine's 4th century laws forbade certain abuses while exempting existing practices, revealing the political difficulty of confronting entrenched customs. Justinian later codes prohibited intimate music use of child slaves, yet enforcement remained inconsistent and limited. Music by region. Barbarian invasions introduced different cultural, music views toward hierarchy and personal relations. Germanic and Gothic societies possessed their own exploitation systems, but lacked Rome's organized structure for commodifying human intimacy. As Roman administration collapsed, the complex network supporting concubinage also dissolved. Transformation rather than disappearance defined the true historical outcome. Medieval European societies developed new forms of exploitation serving similar purposes for ruling elites. The underlying forces, economic inequality creating music vulnerability that powerful groups exploited, continued in altered forms through later centuries. Historical evidence became scarcer as Christian influence expanded and Roman authors avoided subjects conflicting with emerging moral values. Modern scholarship reconstructed the history by assembling fragments from legal codes, medical writings, and archaeological evidence earlier historians overlooked or intentionally ignored. Human trafficking networks today follow patterns Roman dealers would recognize instantly. Music economic desperation pushes vulnerable families to surrender children who vanish into systems of exploitation concealed from public view. Legal structures repeatedly fail those most needing protection. While social attitudes blame victims instead of confronting systemic causes, modern technology allows trafficking on scales exceeding even Roman efficiency. Yet the underlying dynamics remain unchanged.